Miracles have been witnessed throughout history, leaving a profound mark on human faith and understanding. But what would happen if, for a moment, we looked at these phenomena not merely as supernatural manifestations, but as events that might have a scientific explanation? Does that diminish the divine power of God? Or could science, in fact, be an extension of His creative power? In this text, we will explore how science and miracles can coexist in a mysterious and supernatural way, inviting you to reflect on what the divine truly means in our world. Since the dawn of time, humanity has marveled at the vastness and complexity of the universe. In ancient times, people gazed up at the starry sky and believed that everything around them was the work of a divine being. Today, science provides us with detailed explanations about the origin of the cosmos, the laws of physics, and the formation of life. But as we reflect on these concepts, we can realize that science, far from being a separate or contradictory force to belief in God, can in fact be seen as an extension of His creative power. The Bible, in Genesis, presents us with a creation account where God speaks and things come into existence. "Let there be light, and light appears, let there be a firmament, and the sky is formed." This divine power that created everything out of nothing, ex nihilo, is the foundation upon which all natural laws rest. Science, in studying the workings of the universe, can be understood as an attempt to understand and uncover what God had already created. The laws of physics, the mathematics that organizes the cosmos, and the biological principles that govern life are simply manifestations of divine order. When science reveals the harmony of the universe, it is not contradicting God, but rather revealing the greatness of His creation. For example, gravity, which keeps the planets in orbit, or the complexity of DNA molecules that form life, are results of divine design. The fact that the universe follows such consistent and predictable principles is evidence of God's absolute control over natural laws. God's act of creation itself can be seen as the implementation of these laws, which are not accidental but planned with infinite wisdom. When we reflect on creation, science should not be seen as an enemy of faith but as a tool to understand the order that God has established. God's creative act was not an isolated event but the foundation upon which the universe was structured. Thus, as we observe the workings of the cosmos and the complexity of life, we can see science as a way to observe the mind of God, a means of appreciating the greatness of His work. Science can explain the how of things, but the why of creation remains a divine mystery. The fact that the laws of nature are so complex and at the same time so elegant reflects the mind of a supreme creator. Every scientific discovery is a small window into the understanding of God's work, without ever diminishing His role as the author and sustainer of all things. By understanding that science is not a competing explanation to God, but a way to know more about His work, we can see the universe as a grand book of mysteries written by God, with science as a key that allows us to understand each chapter of His creation. No matter how much science advances, it will never fully explain the divine, but it brings us closer to understanding the power that originated everything we know. The Bible is filled with stories of miracles, extraordinary phenomena that defy human understanding and simultaneously demonstrate the supernatural power of God. These miracles are often seen as direct interventions of God in the natural world, actions that escape conventional explanations. However, a deeper approach leads us to question, is it possible that these miracles, in some way, have a scientific explanation, or are they purely supernatural events beyond human comprehension? The story of the crossing of the Red Sea, for example, is one of the most famous biblical accounts of a miracle. The people of Israel, fleeing from the Egyptian army, find themselves facing an insurmountable obstacle, the Red Sea. When Moses raises his staff, the sea parts, allowing the people to cross safely, while the waters close over their enemies. For the faithful, this is a clear manifestation of divine power, a miracle performed by God. However, biblical scholars have suggested that the phenomenon could have a natural explanation, such as a tidal event, where strong winds might have temporarily pushed back the waters. Although such an explanation might be plausible from a scientific standpoint, it does not diminish God's role. For Christians, divine intervention is present in the how and the why of the event, even if it can be partially explained by nature. Another clear example of a miracle in the Bible is the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Jesus feeds a crowd of 5,000 people with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The most common scientific explanation would be the idea of a contagion effect, where people witnessing the scene began to share their own food, resulting in everyone being fed. However, this theory fails to capture the actual miracle that took place, the abundance provided by Christ. Even if the laws of psychology or sociology could suggest a plausible explanation, the central point for Christian faith is that the act was a direct manifestation of divine power, operating within or beyond natural laws. In many miracles, such as Jesus healing the blind or the paralyzed, science might seek explanations in the field of medicine, considering advancements in healing or psychological phenomena such as suggestion and the placebo effect. However, the true essence of these miracles goes beyond what science can explain. Even if science can explain how healing occurred, it cannot in any way affirm that it was God who acted through those natural laws. The central point is that, although science can offer explanations about the natural mechanisms behind miracles, it does not, in any way, diminish the centrality of God in their execution. The Bible teaches us that God not only created the natural laws but also has the power to act through them. These miracles do not happen accidentally or as isolated phenomena separate from divine creation, they are direct manifestations of the divine will that transcend mere scientific explanation. Throughout the scriptures, God reveals a pattern. He acts in ways that we can understand, but also in ways that challenge our logic and comprehension. Even when a miracle might have a natural explanation, the Christian faith teaches that it is still a divine action. God can operate within the laws of nature, but his power goes beyond them, showing that he is the creator and sustainer of all that exists. Therefore, the coexistence between science and miracles should not be seen as opposition. Science can explain how a miracle occurs within natural limits, but the miracle itself, with its intention and purpose, remains an act of God. Christian faith recognizes that, even with scientific explanations, it is God who acts, whether through natural laws or beyond them, demonstrating that he is in control of everything. The miracle, then, is not just a phenomenon to be explained, but a message of his active presence and his eternal power, visible both in the wonders of nature and in the inexplicable miracles. The natural laws of the universe, such as gravity, thermodynamics, and electromagnetism, are, in many respects, the fundamental principles that govern the reality we experience. Science, by studying these laws, unveils the underlying order and complexity of the cosmos. However, as we deepen our understanding of nature, we begin to realize that these laws are not merely scientific explanations, they also reflect divine power and wisdom. Far from distancing us from God, science can be seen as a mirror of his grandeur. For example, the law of gravity, formulated by Isaac Newton, explains how objects attract one another due to gravitational force. The beauty of this law lies not only in its mathematical formula but also in how it organizes the universe with precision and order. Stars and planets remain in their orbits, the Earth revolves around the Sun, and the tides are regulated by the Moon's gravity. But who established such exact order? For many, the answer lies in divine power. Gravity, in its precise and harmonious action, is evidence of a creator who planned and implemented a perfect natural order. Likewise, the laws of thermodynamics, which govern the exchange of energy and the transformation of systems, reflect the perfection of divine design. The idea that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed, is a principle that maintains the balance of the universe. This fundamental principle has profound implications for how creation functions, ensuring that matter and energy are in constant motion, but always within a system that does not permit anarchy or chaos. This balance, this dynamic order, is an expression of God's continual control over creation. And what can be said about the extraordinary complexity of life? The genetic code found in the cells of all living beings is one of the most dazzling expressions of order and precision. DNA, with its intricate chains of nucleotides that determine the construction of every living being, resembles divine engineering more than a random accident of evolution. For many, such complexity can only be explained by an intelligent creator who designed these natural laws so that life could emerge and sustain itself. When we observe science through this lens, we see that natural laws are not separate from God but are instead manifestations of His nature. God not only created the laws that govern the universe, but He also keeps them active, constantly sustaining everything that exists. Science, in describing these laws, is merely beginning to grasp the magnitude of divine power but will never fully capture it. God's action is subtle and infinite, overflowing through physics, biology, and chemistry, permeating all aspects of creation. For instance, Einstein's theory of relativity revolutionized our understanding of time and space. By showing that space-time is curved by gravity, the theory revealed a universe much more interconnected and dynamic than previously imagined. This does not contradict the existence of God, on the contrary, it shows how intricately He has ordered the cosmos so that everything is interconnected. God did not create a static universe, but one in constant transformation, where natural laws operate in perfect harmony. Similarly, discoveries in quantum physics, which involve the behavior of subatomic particles, suggest that the universe is far more mysterious and profound than our senses can perceive. The fact that particles can behave in such unpredictable and seemingly chaotic ways may, at first glance, seem to challenge divine order. However, many see this as an expression of God's creative freedom, showing that He is not limited by our concepts of predictability or rationality. God's power extends to the deepest and most mysterious levels of creation. Therefore, science does not diminish the power of God, it merely provides us with a richer perspective on how He operates in the world. Every scientific discovery can be viewed as an open window into the magnificence of God's work. Natural laws are ultimately a way to understand how God maintains control over all things, operating through a system that reflects His infinite wisdom. Science, then, is not a substitute for faith, but a way to further glorify God, for it allows us to contemplate the beauty and perfection of the creation He designed. Thus, while science seeks to understand the natural laws and phenomena of the universe, Christian faith teaches us that all these laws are reflections of divine power. Science may explain the mechanisms, but it can never capture the full purpose behind each of these processes. God is the source of these laws and, as such, He is present in all of creation, not merely as an observer, but as the Creator who sustains and directs everything that exists. The line between natural phenomena and divine miracles has been, throughout history, a point of intense reflection and debate. The definition of a miracle is often an event that transcends natural explanations, a direct act of God's intervention. However, with scientific advances, many phenomena once considered miraculous have come to be understood through natural laws, which raises the question, are these events scientific explanations or still divine miracles? How can we recognize the touch of God in the wonders of nature without diminishing His power? One of the most iconic miracles in the Bible is the episode in which the sun stood still in the sky, as recorded in the book of Joshua. According to the account, Joshua and the army of Israel were in battle against the Amorites, and to ensure victory, Joshua asked God to stop the movement of the sun and moon until the battle was won. The Bible describes, "So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies," Joshua 10 verse 13. This astonishing miracle is undoubtedly one of the most extraordinary manifestations of divine power, but could it be possible without a scientific explanation? From a scientific perspective, the sun stopping in the sky seems impossible, as it pertains to the movement of celestial bodies in relation to the Earth. Modern science explains that the Earth rotates on its axis, creating day and night. For the sun to stop, the Earth would have to cease its rotation, something that would cause catastrophic effects like earthquakes, tsunamis, and global climate changes. However, some scientific theories suggest that phenomena such as a solar eclipse or a shift in Earth's orbit could, in some way, have created a temporary effect that was interpreted as the sun standing still. Although this explanation is not widely accepted, it illustrates science's attempt to provide justification for what the Bible describes as a miracle. However, even if plausible scientific explanations exist, they do not diminish the divine nature of the miracle. If there was indeed an alteration in the natural order of the universe, we can see it as a direct action of God. According to Christian faith, God is the creator and sustainer of natural laws, and he has the power to operate within these laws or to transcend them. In this sense, even a scientific explanation can be seen as a means through which God chose to act. Science, in explaining the mechanics of the world, may reveal the complexity of how the miracle happened, but it does not negate the fact that God is the author of the action. This principle applies to many other biblical miracles, such as the multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Science might suggest natural explanations for the increase in food, like a social reaction in which people spontaneously began to share what they had, creating sudden abundance. However, for believers, the miracle lies not only in the how the act occurred, but in the fact that God orchestrated the event. Science may explain the phenomenon tangibly, but the divine purpose remains unchanged. The phenomenon of divine healing is another example that highlights the coexistence of science and faith. In cases where someone is cured of an illness in an inexplicable way, modern medicine may seek an explanation in the placebo effect, medical advances, or even misdiagnosis. However, even if a scientific explanation is offered, the personal experience and faith of the individual may reveal something deeper, a divine action that, in some way, transcends the limitations of science. The central truth we must understand is that God can operate through natural laws, but that does not mean he is limited by them. God's miracles should not be seen as violations of nature, but as manifestations of divine power that can be expressed through any aspect of the universe. If a miracle can be explained by science, that does not make it any less miraculous, because what matters most is God's action. Science may explain the methods used, but it will never capture the divine purpose behind these acts. As we reflect on Joshua's miracle, for instance, we see that regardless of how it physically occurred, the central point is that it was a direct intervention by God in the life of his people. The miracle happened because God chose to act in that way, not because of a coincidence of natural phenomena. Ultimately, both natural phenomena and divine miracles belong to God, for he is the creator of all the laws that govern the universe. Thus, it is important to realize that the relationship between science and miracle is not one of opposition, but of complementarity. Science can reveal how phenomena occur, but Christian faith teaches us that God is in control of everything and that his action is the ultimate cause of all miracles. So even if science can provide natural explanations for certain events, the hand of God remains the fundamental force behind everything that happens in the universe. Therefore, when addressing natural phenomena and miracles, we must remember that science can only touch the surface of the divine mystery. It can explain what we see, but it can never fully capture what God does or his purpose in all things. The miracle, whether explainable or not, always reflects the active and sovereign presence of God in the world. The miracles recorded in the New Testament are fundamental for understanding the mission of Jesus Christ and the power of God on earth. Throughout the Gospels, we witness a series of extraordinary events that defy natural laws, yet always carry a deeper reason behind their manifestation. The healing of the sick, the multiplication of food, the resurrection of the dead, all of these miracles are not just signs of Christ's power, but also expressions of divine love and the promise of salvation for humanity. But what happens when we attempt to understand these miracles through the lens of science? How can faith and science coexist when it comes to the miracles narrated in the New Testament? Let us begin with one of the most well-known miracles, the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, narrated in all four Gospels. According to the accounts, Jesus fed a crowd of 5,000 men with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. To the human mind, this appears to be an impossible phenomenon. The immediate scientific explanation might suggest some kind of illusion, such as the idea that the people in the crowd, seeing the generosity of a few, began to share their own food, creating the impression that a miracle was taking place. However, the Gospels do not imply that the miracle was a mere social coincidence. Jesus took what little there was and, after blessing it, made it sufficient for everyone, with 12 baskets left over. The scientific explanation does not diminish the significance of the miracle but places it in context. The idea that something impossible can happen is challenging for science, as science is built on observation, repetition, and the understanding of natural phenomena. Miracles, by their very nature, are not reproducible or verifiable by conventional scientific methods. This brings us to the central question: even if we can suggest natural or social explanations for these events, the presence of God as the author of the miracle can never be replaced or fully explained by science. He is the creator of the natural laws, but also sovereign over them. Another emblematic example from the New Testament is the healing of the blind, a recurring theme in Jesus' life. One of the most notable cases is that of a man born blind, healed by Jesus in John 9. When his disciples ask who sinned, the man or his parents, Jesus responds that neither did, but that it happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. The miracle of curing blindness is something modern medicine seeks to explain in various ways, especially through the development of treatments for eye diseases. But the miracle performed by Jesus goes beyond physical healing; it brings spiritual depth, restoring not only physical sight but also inner vision, illuminating the heart and soul. Science may treat physical blindness, but it cannot restore the human being's spiritual gaze. In fact, many of Jesus' miracles contain a spiritual transformation component, not just a physical one. The healing of the woman with the issue of blood, for instance, is a healing experience not only of the body but also of the soul and her life. She is not only healed from her ailment but also restored to society and the religious community, her dignity returned. For science, the healing of a disease like the issue of blood might be explained through medical interventions, but what Christian faith teaches is that Jesus not only healed physically, he also brought emotional and spiritual healing, something science cannot measure or comprehend. The resurrection of Lazarus, another remarkable miracle in the New Testament, is an event that also defies scientific understanding. Lazarus, who had died and had been buried for 4 days, is brought back to life by Jesus. This miracle is one of the most powerful demonstrations of God's sovereignty over life and death. Science, even with its advancements in biology and medicine, has no explanation for resurrection. But Christian faith teaches that Lazarus' resurrection was not merely a return to physical life but a manifestation of Christ's eternal power and a foreshadowing of his own resurrection. Science cannot explain the how of this miracle, but faith teaches us that, for God, nothing is impossible. These New Testament miracles show us that, although science may offer explanations about the how of certain phenomena, it will never be able to fully capture the depth and purpose of God's miracles. Science can help understand the natural processes happening in the world, but it cannot comprehend the direct and supernatural action of God, which goes beyond nature. Therefore, it is essential to realize that while science explores the method and the means by which events occur, faith teaches us that God is the author and principal agent of all miracles. Science does not diminish the supernatural nature of Jesus' miracles; it can, in a way, deepen our understanding of what happened, but never replace the belief that divine power is behind it all. Faith and science are not antagonistic but can be seen as complementary parts of humanity's search for truth. Science gives us the tools to explore the material and natural world, but faith leads us to recognize the divine mystery that permeates all creation. As Christians, we believe that God can work through the laws of nature but can also transcend those laws when necessary, demonstrating his power in ways science could never fully explain. A miracle in the New Testament is, therefore, an invitation to faith, a call to recognize the divine power that is not limited to scientific explanations but is present and active in every aspect of our lives. As we move forward in the search for answers about the world around us, science remains one of humanity's most powerful tools. It allows us to explore, investigate, and even manipulate aspects of the natural reality that were once unimaginable. From understanding the foundations of physics to advances in biotechnology, science provides us with a deep insight into how the universe works. However, as impressive as these advances may be, there is a fundamental truth that must be acknowledged: science will never be able to fully explain the entirety of God, nor the divine mysteries that transcend our understanding. Although science is an essential tool for understanding the workings of the natural world, it operates within a set of limits. It can only explain what is observable, repeatable, and measurable. But God, by his very nature, is not confined by these parameters. He is the creator of all that exists, the sustainer of the cosmos, and at the same time, the transcendent one, beyond the reach of total human comprehension. Even the greatest scientific thinkers recognize that there are boundaries to what science can achieve. Science can study the laws of nature, but it cannot capture the essence of who God is or the divine purpose behind creation. In many religions, including Christianity, God is described as infinite, eternal, and omniscient, attributes that, by definition, cannot be fully understood by limited human beings. The Bible teaches us that, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways," Isaiah 55 verse 8, suggesting that the mysteries of God are beyond our capacity to grasp. Thus, while science can help us understand how the natural world functions, it cannot give us direct access to the mystery of God. Scientific explanations are, by nature, limited to what can be observed and tested, but God, as the Creator, is infinite and eternal, and therefore not subject to the limitations of time, space, or natural laws. When we encounter phenomena such as miracles, be it the healing of a blind man, the multiplication of loaves, or the resurrection of the dead, we may try to seek scientific explanations, but these events defy human logic and reason. The act of resurrecting a dead person, for example, lies completely outside the scope of biology and medicine. Science can study death and the processes that occur in the body afterward, but it can never explain how life can be supernaturally restored. Resurrection cannot be measured or repeated in a laboratory, it is a mystery that escapes human understanding. The attempt to explain God through science is, in many respects, a noble but limited endeavor. As human beings, we are inclined to seek certainty and rational explanations for everything that surrounds us. We want to understand the how and the why of everything, especially when it comes to extraordinary phenomena. However, in doing so, we risk trying to confine God within the structures we have created to understand the world. We cannot reduce the infinite to our finite understanding. The attempt to do so is, in itself, a human limitation. In many biblical stories, we see examples of how human limitation is placed into perspective in the face of divine power. The Apostle Paul himself, reflecting on the mysteries of God, writes, "Now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face," 1 Corinthians 13 verse 12. In other words, what we understand now is only an imperfect reflection of what we will one day fully comprehend, when we are in the presence of God. Science may be a lens that allows us to see aspects of God's creation, but it cannot give us a complete vision of His grandeur. God, unlike science, is not limited by time or space. He is not subject to physical laws that can be studied or tested. He is timeless, omnipotent, and omnipresent. His action in the world is not limited by the same rules that govern the behavior of subatomic particles or gravitational forces. That is why attempts to understand God through scientific explanation fail, because He transcends the very nature of science itself. In our everyday lives, we often encounter moments where science and faith intersect. When we face crises, challenges, or situations that seem impossible to resolve, we may seek a scientific explanation to understand what is happening. However, often, the answer to our dilemmas comes from a place beyond rational explanation. The peace we find in prayer, the strength we feel when we sense God's presence, these are not things science can quantify or analyze. They are experiences that speak directly to our heart and soul, revealing a spiritual dimension that goes beyond what the eyes can see or instruments can measure. It is important to remember that science is not the enemy of faith, it can be seen as a tool that helps uncover the secrets of the universe God created. However, while science can reveal the how of the world, it cannot explain the why of existence, the ultimate reason for everything that happens. Science can show us how the universe operates, but it is faith that allows us to understand that behind it all, there is a Creator who is sovereign and has a divine purpose for all of creation. In the end, science and faith should not be seen as conflicting forces but as two different ways of exploring reality. Science helps us understand the functioning of the world, while faith teaches us to recognize the divine mystery that lies beyond human comprehension. Science may offer answers to many of our questions, but the true answer about the nature of God and the purpose of life lies beyond the reach of human reason. Human limitation, then, should not be seen as an obstacle but as an opportunity to recognize the greatness of God and His sovereign action in our lives. Science can guide us in our understanding of the world, but it is faith that connects us to the Creator, who transcends all human explanations and is, forever, a wondrous mystery. As we reflect on the relationship between science and divinity, we are confronted with an inescapable truth. No matter how much science helps us understand the natural aspects of the world around us, it will never be able to explain the full mystery of God. While we may seek answers in the laws that govern the universe, the true divine essence transcends the boundaries of human comprehension. Science can illuminate how the world works, reveal the processes behind miracles, and even suggest plausible explanations for extraordinary events. However, it will never be able to capture the totality of God, the eternal Creator who, in addition to being the author of natural laws, also acts in supernatural ways that go beyond our perception. That is why faith invites us to look beyond what is tangible, challenging us to recognize that the true understanding of the universe and of ourselves can only be achieved when we place ourselves before the infinite wisdom of God, which lies beyond the capacity of human understanding. And so, the great question remains: science may attempt to explain, but God remains beyond our reach, and that, in itself, is a miracle.